Rain beat against the low windows of the Hathaway Inn, turning the glass into a shifting silvery blur. Inside, the taproom flickered with candlelight and the scent of roasting mutton, but the warmth did little to soften the edges of Eliza Hathaway's world. Her hands, red from scrubbing tankards, moved deftly among the tables as she delivered ale to men who barely glanced her way. To them, she was invisible. A plain girl in a faded blue dress, hair braided back with no ornament, her gaze too steady, her words too plain. But Eliza's heart burned with restless dreams. Each night, as she watched laughter circle the fire, she imagined a life that belonged to someone else. A life with music, with books, with something more than the clatter of plates and her uncle's sharp voice. Yet after her father's passing, the Hathaway name held no coin and even less power. She worked from dawn until the moon was high, and her hope became something secret, fierce, and not easily broken. The wind rattled the door. It burst open, sending a spray of rain across the floor and drawing every eye. Framed in the threshold stood a man with an air of command, his dark hair plastered to his brow, his coat sodden and fine boots caked in mud. He was tall, with a bearing that made the crowded room shrink around him. He strode in, trailing water, and barked. "Who is in charge here? I require assistance at once." Eliza's uncle bustled forward, but she reached the stranger first, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're letting the storm in, sir. Kindly close the door if you wish to remain dry." He turned, assessing her with a haughty sweep of his eyes. "I am in need of a room and a hot meal. My carriage is in ruins, and my driver is seeking help for the horses. See to it at once." His tone was clipped, the accent unmistakably aristocratic. Eliza bristled. "If you wish to command, sir, you might try the army. Here, you may ask." He stared, as if surprised the furniture had spoken. Then, a slow frown. "Are all your staff so impertinent? Or only you?" She met his gaze evenly. "Only those who are spoken to as if they were cattle." A few men snickered, but Eliza did not flinch. The stranger's lips quirked, the barest hint of amusement flickering before he caught himself. "My apologies," he said stiffly. "It has been an arduous journey. I am Lord Montford Alexander Montford, Viscount of Alderley. I require privacy and service, and I will pay well for both." Eliza dipped a shallow curtsy, but her eyes never left his. "We have a room. The kitchen is slow tonight, but I'll see what can be done." She turned to fetch his supper, aware of his gaze following her. When she returned, he was seated by the fire, his wet coat steaming, boots stretched toward the flames. She set down a plate of stew and a hunk of bread. He spoke without looking up. "You are not like the others here. And you are not used to being refused," she shot back. Alexander smiled despite himself. "No, I am not." A quiet settled between them, charged and brittle. Eliza lingered, her hands folded. He glanced up. "What is your name?" "Eliza Hathaway." "Hathaway." His brow furrowed. "This is your family's inn." "It was my father's, now it is my uncle's. I work here because I must." He studied her, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "And if you had a choice?" "I would not be serving ale at midnight." She straightened, her jaw set. "But life rarely gives us choices, my lord." Something in her defiance intrigued him, a spark he could not name. On impulse, he said, "I will be in this village some days. My affairs require discretion, and I cannot abide tedious company. You have wit enough. Become my companion during my stay. I will pay you handsomely." Eliza recoiled. "You mistake me for a girl who can be bought." He hesitated, then softened his tone. "I only require conversation and guidance, nothing more. The countryside is unfamiliar, and I have little patience for dullness." She weighed the offer, pride and need warring within her. The inn's roof leaked, her uncle's debts mounting. She could not afford to refuse. "Very well," she said at last, her voice steady. "But only for a few days, and on my own terms." He inclined his head, a rare smile curving his lips. "Agreed, Miss Hathaway." Lightning flashed at the windows, and in its brief illumination, Eliza saw not just a titled stranger, but a door opening. She did not yet know whether it led to salvation or ruin, but she stepped through all the same. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a bargain had been struck, and neither Eliza nor Alexander would emerge unchanged. In the shadowed corner of the taproom, an old man watched them, eyes narrowed, as if he too sensed the turning of fate's wheel. The morning air in Alderley village held a chill that clung to the stone cottages and tangled hedgerows. But Eliza Hathaway felt only the heat of dozens of watching eyes. She walked beside Alexander Montford, her posture rigid, her chin high, while villagers paused in their chores to stare. Men at the smithy let their hammers still. A milkmaid halted, pail in hand, as whispers darted between doorways. Eliza's simple dress and apron marked her as one of their own, but the company she kept now set her apart. She saw it in the narrowed gazes, in the way Mrs. Bray, the grocer's wife, pursed her lips and turned her back. Alexander strode ahead, oblivious at first. His world had always bent to his will. Doors opened, paths cleared. Voices dropped when he passed. Only when Eliza hesitated at the market square did he notice the tension rippling through the air. "Is something amiss?" he asked, glancing down. "They think I am putting on airs, walking with you," Eliza replied, voice low but unwavering. "A girl like me, beside a man like you, it is a spectacle, my lord." He frowned, as if the notion were foreign. They should mind their own affairs. Eliza's lips twitched. Villagers thrive on little L. He gave a huff of laughter, and for a heartbeat, something softened in his eyes. But as they continued, the stares did not abate. Children peeked from behind fences. The parson's wife nodded with forced politeness and turned away. Eliza endured it all with a practiced calm, but her heart beat a steady tattoo of anxiety. She had made a bargain for her family's sake, but each step beside Alexander marked her as different. Already the lines of belonging had begun to blur. When they reached the Montford estate, its grandeur loomed over the village like a silent rebuke. The gates opened to sweeping lawns, clipped hedges, and a mansion of pale stone. Eliza paused, suddenly conscious of the mud on her hem and the calluses on her hands. Alexander noticed her hesitation. "You need not be uneasy. My staff will attend to you." She shook her head. "It is not your staff I fear, my lord." He studied her, uncertain, but said nothing as they entered. Inside, the marble-floored foyer bustled with servants' maids carrying linens, a butler arranging flowers, a footman in livery. They froze as Eliza appeared at Alexander's side. Murmurs rippled. Mrs. Harcourt, the housekeeper, fixed her with a chilly stare. "My lord," she intoned, "shall I prepare tea in the blue drawing-room?" "That will do," Alexander replied. He turned to Eliza. "You are welcome here as my guest." The word guest did little to thaw the frost in Mrs. Harcourt's eyes. She curtsied, but her gaze lingered, sharp as a blade. As they passed through echoing halls, Alexander caught Eliza's discomfort. "They will grow accustomed." "I have brought strangers here before." Eliza smiled without mirth. "But never a serving girl from the village, I think." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The drawing-room was flooded with light and the scent of violets. Eliza perched on the edge of a brocade chair, painfully aware of her plain dress against silk and velvet. Alexander paced, distracted, dictating letters and consulting ledgers. He expected her to be silent, to wait. But Eliza's curiosity refused to be stilled. She watched him work efficient, impatient, commanding, and, after a time, she spoke. "Why must your tenants pay so much for grazing rights? The land is rich. You could lower the rates and still profit." He stopped mid-sentence, startled. "You have opinions on estate matters." "I have lived among those who pay your rents," she replied. "I know what a shilling means to them." He looked at her, truly looked, for the first time. "You are not afraid to speak plainly." "Should I be?" He almost smiled. "Most people are." A knock interrupted them. The door opened, and in swept a lady whose resemblance to Alexander was unmistakable. Tall, fair, eyes the color of steel. Her dress was of the latest London fashion, her bearing regal. "Alexander, you are returned at last, and you have company." "Margaret, allow me to introduce Miss Hathaway," Alexander said. "She is assisting me during my stay." Lady Margaret's gaze swept Eliza from head to toe, cool and appraising. "Assisting? In what manner?" Eliza stood, steadying herself. "I act as a companion and guide in the village, my lady." Nothing more. Margaret's lips curved in a polite, brittle smile. "How admirable. I hope you are finding our household to your liking, Miss Hathaway." Eliza met her stare. "Your home is very fine. but I find myself most at ease where there is less ceremony. Margaret's eyes narrowed a fraction. Of course, I imagine you do. A tension, sharp as piano wire, thrummed in the room. Alexander cleared his throat. Miss Hathaway's insight has proved useful. Margaret's attention flicked to her brother. I'm sure it has. Alexander, may I have a word? Hesitated, then nodded, leaving Eliza alone in the sea of velvet and gilt. She gazed out the window, her heart pounding. Lady Margaret's suspicion had been clear. She saw Eliza as a threat, a schemer. Eliza's hands tightened in her lap. She would not let herself be cowed, but neither could she ignore the scrutiny that now shadowed her every step. Later, as Eliza walked the gardens, a pair of maids passed nearby, their voices pitched just above a whisper. She's after the Viscount, you mark my words. He'll tire of her soon enough. These country girls think they can snare a title with a pretty face. Eliza's cheeks burned. She kept walking, shoulders straight, but their words clung to her like burrs. When Alexander found her by the rose arbor, he sensed the change in her. They are talking, aren't they? He asked quietly. She nodded, unable to hide the hurt in her eyes. They think I am here to better myself at your expense. He frowned. Let them talk. They do not know you. But you do not know me either, my lord, she said softly. Not truly. A silence stretched between them, heavy and full of unspoken truths. Alexander looked away, struggling with the discomfort of a world where lines were drawn in birth and fortune. Eliza's dignity unsettled him. Her intelligence, her refusal to be cowed, these things drew him in ways he could not name. Yet even as he admired her, he wrestled with the boundaries that tradition demanded. Was she a curiosity, a diversion, or something more? The days passed. Eliza accompanied Alexander to tenants' cottages, to the churchyard, to the old mill by the river. She saw the respect he commanded, but also the isolation that came with it. She watched him argue over contracts with the steward, his voice firm, but sometimes when he thought himself unobserved, his shoulders bowed with fatigue. At night, in her small attic room, Eliza replayed each conversation, each glance. Her world was changing, yet she stood alone on the threshold of something vast and unknowable. Rumors grew. In the taproom, in the market, tongues wagged. The inn's business suffered. Her uncle's warnings grew sharper. And at Montfort House, servants eyed her with suspicion, their whispers following her down every corridor. Yet, when Eliza and Alexander truly spoke. There was something between them that neither could deny. Respect, perhaps, curiosity, the beginnings of trust. But as the sun set behind the Montfort estate and Eliza lingered at the window, she knew the cost of stepping beyond her station was growing heavier with every passing day. The village would not forget, nor, she suspected, would Lady Margaret, whose watchful gaze never seemed to leave her, not even in the quietest hours. And just as Eliza thought she might finally understand her place in this tangled world, a carriage arrived at the gates, bearing a guest whose arrival would upend every fragile certainty she had begun to trust. A hush lingered between Eliza and Alexander in the sunlit morning room, the sort of silence that bore the memory of arguments and the promise of something gentler. Weeks had passed since the stormy night at the inn, and what began as a wary arrangement had softened unevenly, uncertainly into a strange kind of friendship. They circled each other with the caution of dancers unsure of the next step, but the distance between them was shrinking, word by hesitant word. Alexander had shed some of his hauteur in Eliza's presence, even as he chafed under the scrutiny of his household and the weight of his title. She, in turn, let slip glimpses of her true self, her wit, her fierce pride, her longing for a life beyond obligation. On the surface, their exchanges remained guarded, but beneath where words did not always reach, a fragile trust was growing. On a rare afternoon when the house was quiet, Alexander sat at the piano, his fingers idly seeking a melody. Eliza, dusting the shelves nearby, ventured, "You play well, my lord. I did not expect it." He looked up, a faint smile on his lips. "It was my mother's wish that I master an instrument. She believed it might make me more suitable." "Suitable for what?" Eliza asked, pausing with a book in hand. He hesitated, then answered. For marriage, of course. For alliances. My family expects me to choose a bride with a fortune, a name to match our own. The list of eligible young ladies is recited to me at every supper. Eliza's hands tightened around the book. And is that what you wish? A shadow crossed his face. What I wish is rarely considered. My father was a hard man, and my mother, she is steel beneath her silks. They would see me wed to Lady Clarissa Ashcombe before the year is out. Her dowry is legendary, as is her ambition. Eliza set the book down. It must be a lonely thing to have your future decided for you. He gave a short, bitter laugh. It is the price of birth, Miss Hathaway. And you? What future did you dream of before? She looked away, the memory raw. My father's death ruined us. There was never enough to keep the inn or pay the debts. My mother faded quickly, and my uncle took us in out of duty, not affection. I dreamed of teaching, perhaps, or of having a place of my own, somewhere I might read and think and not answer to anyone. But dreams do not fill empty bellies. Alexander was quiet a moment, then said, You are braver than you know, Eliza. Her name on his tongue startled her, and for a breathless instant, the world narrowed to the space between them. That evening, the Montforts hosted a grand ball, the sort that turned the estate into a glittering jewel, every chandelier ablaze and every room thronged with the county's finest. Eliza was confined to the servants' quarters, but her duties brought her near the festivities. She glimpsed silks and satins, jewels that caught the candlelight, and laughter that rang like bells. Later, as the revelry swelled and the music drifted through the corridors, Eliza slipped into the gallery overlooking the ballroom. There, beneath the gilded moldings, Alexander found her drawn, perhaps, by the same longing that had pulled her to the edge of celebration. You look as if you would rather be anywhere else, he said softly. Eliza managed a wan smile. It is a world apart, my lord. One I may watch, but never enter. He hesitated, then offered his hand. Come, just for a moment. She stared at him, incredulous. What are you doing? Dancing, he said, his voice low. No one will notice us here. He drew her into the shadowed alcove where the strains of a waltz filtered up from below. His hand was warm at her waist, his touch surprisingly gentle. For a moment, the world shrank to the cadence of their steps, the hush of their breath. Eliza's heart thundered. If we are seen, let them see, Alexander murmured, though his own voice was tight with risk. They moved together, awkward at first, then more certain. Eliza felt the forbidden thrill of being chosen, just for a moment, over all the glittering beauties below. Alexander's gaze held hers, and in it she saw not a lord or a master, but a man uncertain, yearning, real. Then a voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the intimacy. Well, what a charming tableau. Eliza froze. Lady Clarissa Ashcombe stood in the doorway, her gown a confection of pearls and icy blue silk, her eyes glittering with triumph. Behind her, others pressed forward guests, servants, Lady Margaret herself. Clarissa's lips curved. How delightful to find the Viscount of Alderley waltzing in the dark with the help. Will you introduce us, Alexander? He stepped forward, jaw clenched. Lady Clarissa, this is Miss Hathaway. She is not your equal, Alexander, Clarissa interrupted, her gaze raking over Eliza. It is unseemly, and frankly, it is embarrassing, for all of us. A ripple of laughter swept the onlookers. Eliza felt the heat of humiliation rise in her throat, but she would not bow her head. Clarissa turned to her, voice dripping with false sweetness. My dear, do you really imagine that you belong here, that a dance will make you one of us? Eliza forced herself to meet Clarissa's gaze. No, my lady, I have no such illusions. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. Good, then you will know your place. The crowd melted away, but the damage was done. Eliza's cheeks burned, her dignity in tatters. She slipped from the gallery, fleeing down the back stairs, her breath ragged. In the kitchen, maids whispered, their eyes bright with gossip. The humiliation spread through the house like wildfire. Alexander found her in the servants' hall, his expression stormy. Eliza, I am sorry. I did not think. She cut him off. You did not have to. They will never let me forget this. He reached for her, but she stepped back. It was only a dance, she whispered. But for them, it is a scandal. He looked stricken. I will speak to my mother. I will not have you shamed for my folly. True to his word, Alexander confronted Lady Montfort that very night. The dowager was a formidable figure, every inch the matriarch. Her eyes were cold as she regarded her son. You have embarrassed this family, she declared. This girl, she must be dismissed at once. I will not have the Montfort name dragged through the mud for a servant's whim. Alexander's fists clenched. She is not to blame. Lady Montfort's voice was ice. Nevertheless, she will leave, tonight. The order was final, ringing through the halls like a death knell. Word spread before the candles guttered out, and the servants gathered in uneasy knots, their faces drawn. Alone in her small chamber, Eliza packed her meager belongings with trembling hands. Her heart ached with shame, but fiercer still was the sense of loss for the friendship she had found, for the dreams she had begun to nurture. In the hush before dawn, as Eliza prepared to leave Montfort House forever, a soft footstep sounded outside her door. Someone had come, defying the household's wrath and the threat of scandal, unwilling to let her slip away without a final word. The road from Montfort House to the Hathaway Inn was slick with summer rain and the weight of disappointment. Eliza walked it before dawn, her bundle clutched tight, the world around her silent, save for the squelch of her shoes and the low hum of her thoughts. The grand gates closed behind her, but their echo lingered in her chest. Each step away from the estate was a step back into the smaller, harsher world that had always been hers. By the time she reached the inn, the sky was streaked with pale light. Her uncle's eyes widened when he saw her disheveled, hollow-eyed, her pride stripped to the bone. "Eliza," he demanded, "what have you done?" She straightened, summoning the last of her dignity. "They sent me away. There was a misunderstanding at the house. I'm sorry, uncle." He grunted and turned away, muttering about ruined reputations and the folly of ambition. Her old room was waiting. Little changed but for a thick layer of dust and the faint scent of mildew. Eliza set her bag on the narrow bed, hands trembling as she unpacked her few belongings. A worn book, a hair ribbon, the locket her mother had left her. She sat on the bed, staring at the faded patchwork quilt, and let the ache of loss settle deep. The days that followed were a haze of routine and humiliation. Word of the scandal traveled quickly faster, even, than she expected. In the market, women averted their eyes or whispered behind their hands. Children snickered, parroting their mother's sneers. Even old Mrs. Bray, once kind, pursed her lips and refused to meet Eliza's gaze. At the inn, customers grew bolder. Men made sly remarks. Some offered a coin for her trouble. Eliza endured each insult with clenched fists and burning cheeks, determined to rise above it. Still, the weight of shame pressed down heavier each day. Her uncle's patience wore thin. "You bring shame to this house," he hissed one evening after she dropped a tankard. "No man will look at you now unless he's after what's already been given." Eliza bristled. "I've done nothing wrong, uncle. Nothing shameful." He shook his head. "The world cares little for truth, girl, only for the story." Yet, as the world closed in, Eliza discovered a new kind of resilience. She worked harder, her movements brisk and efficient. She learned to ignore the taunts, to meet every slight with icy silence. The hurt remained, but she refused to let it define her. Meanwhile, in the echoing halls of Montfort House, Alexander moved like a man haunted. He went through the motions of estate management meeting with tenants, answering letters, attending dinners, but the world felt hollow. Eliza's absence was a wound he could not ignore. He found himself pausing in doorways, half expecting her to be there, reaching for clever conversation, only to be met with emptiness. Lady Montfort, sensing her son's distraction, redoubled her efforts. "You are not a boy, Alexander," she snapped over breakfast one morning. "The time has come to think of your duty. Lady Clarissa is everything you require: beauty, breeding, fortune." He stared into his teacup, voice tight. "Clarissa is not what I require, mother." She pursed her lips. "You will marry her. The invitations are nearly written. I will not have this family's name sullied further by your indiscretions. Alexander rose, his chair scraping sharply. You cannot command my heart, mother. Nor my happiness. She watched him go, her expression hardening. I can, and I will, she whispered, more to herself than to him. The days bled into one another. Eliza's world shrank to the inn's kitchen, the tap room, the narrow lanes of the village. Each time she stepped outside, she felt the eyes upon her, some pitying, most scornful. Her only solace was the quiet hour before dawn, when she could slip into the garden and breathe the air untainted by rumor. One afternoon, as the sky pressed low and gray over the village, a visitor arrived at the inn. Mr. Webb, the local solicitor, was a man of sober habits and careful words. He waited in the parlor, hat in hand, his manner grave. Eliza, he said when she entered, may I have a word? She nodded, wary. He cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. You know your reputation has suffered. It is cruel and unfair, but it is the way of things. I have admired you for some time. If you would consider a match with me, your good name could be restored. I could provide for you. You would want for nothing. Eliza stared at him, stunned. You wish to marry me? He nodded, color rising in his cheeks. Not out of pity, Miss Hathaway, out of respect, but I cannot stand by and watch you endure this. A proposal would silence the gossip. The offer was tempting, in its own way. Safety, respectability, a home. But it was not enough. Thank you, Mr. Webb, she said gently. You are very kind. But I cannot marry you. Not for reputation's sake, nor for comfort. He looked stricken. But your circumstances. She shook her head, voice steady. I would rather be scorned and free than respected and unhappy. He bowed his head, disappointment etched deep. As you wish, Miss Hathaway, if you ever change your mind. I will not, she replied, softly but firmly. He left, and with him went the last easy escape. Eliza watched him go, feeling the weight of her choice settle over her shoulders, heavy but honest. That night, the inn was noisy with laughter and the clink of mugs. Eliza moved among the tables, her expression composed, her heart aching. She was clearing away a tray when she felt a presence behind her. A hush, then a low voice. Eliza. She turned, and there he was. Alexander stood in the shadowed corner, his fine coat damp with rain, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, neither spoke. You should not be here, she said quietly. He stepped closer, heedless of the stares beginning to gather. I had to see you. I have been a fool, Eliza. I let them send you away. I let their rules matter more than what I knew to be right. Her breath caught. It is too late for apologies, my lord. He shook his head. It is not. Come back to Montfort House. Not as a servant, not as someone to be hidden. Come back as my companion, as my equal. The words hung between them, trembling with hope and fear. Eliza's eyes narrowed. As your equal. Can you truly offer that, Alexander? Or will I be paraded out when it suits you, hidden when it does not? He flushed, struggling. I want you by my side. I want your wit, your honesty. I cannot. She cut him off, voice rising. You want me when it is convenient. When your mother is not watching. When Lady Clarissa is not in the room. But I will not be your secret, Alexander. If you wish me in your life, you will do so openly, with respect and sincerity. Not as a whim, not as a scandal to be managed. He stared at her, pain and longing warring in his face. I do respect you, Eliza, more than anyone. Then prove it, she said. Stand up to them, not for me, but for yourself. Until then, I will not come. Their gazes locked, the air thick with all that could not be spoken. Around them, the taproom seemed to fade, the laughter and music distant echoes. For a heartbeat, Eliza thought he might take her hand, that he might promise everything she needed to hear. But Alexander only nodded, his voice raw. I will not give up on you, Eliza, not now. She watched him go, her heart pounding with fear and something like hope. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the world seemed to hold its breath. In the silence that followed, Eliza squared her shoulders, feeling the shape of her resolve. She would not settle for less than her worth, not from Alexander, not from anyone. The storm had not yet passed, but for the first time in weeks she felt the stirrings of her old, stubborn courage. Unbeknownst to her, as Alexander rode away into the night, a carriage door slammed shut at Montford House, and Lady Montford's voice rang out, summoning her son, summoning fate. A reckoning was coming, and neither Eliza nor Alexander could yet imagine the price or the promise it would bring. Eliza Hathaway rose before dawn, her resolve hardening with the first pale light that crept through the warped window panes of the inn. Gone was the girl who had flinched from whispers and sidelong glances. In her place stood a woman determined to reclaim her place in the world, not by another's name, but by her own worth. She scrubbed the taproom until the oak gleamed, taught her uncle's cook a new recipe for savory pies, and haggled fiercely at market for the freshest produce. Gradually, the inn's reputation revived, the air within scented with rosemary and laughter, rather than stale ale and resentment. But Eliza's ambitions did not end at the threshold of the Hathaway Inn. She noticed the hollow-eyed children in the lane, the old men coughing in the chill, and the women who bartered away their last coins for bread. She brought soup to the sick, found work for widows, and quietly mended what she could. At first, the villagers watched her with wary curiosity, but kindness is a stubborn seed. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was gratitude. Awkward at first, then blossoming into genuine affection. Mrs. Bray began sending over fresh eggs, and the vicar's wife pressed a bunch of late roses into Eliza's hands, just because. Even the children stopped taunting, instead gathering round to listen to her stories as she swept the steps. Yet, as Eliza's world widened, Alexander Montford's seemed to shrink. He moved through the echoing halls of the estate with increasing restlessness, each formality chafing against his conscience. Dinner with Lady Clarissa was a performance, conversation with his mother, a negotiation. He spent hours riding the estate, seeking solace in the fields and the company of tenants who greeted him with wary respect. But he found little peace. At night, he lay awake, haunted by memories of Eliza's laughter, her quiet strength, and the unyielding clarity in her eyes when she demanded honesty from him. One afternoon, Alexander found Margaret in the library, the firelight painting her face in warm gold. She glanced up from her book, arching a brow at her brother's agitated pacing. "You are wearing a path in the carpet, Alex," she remarked. "Shall I fetch the groundskeeper to lay fresh turf?" He scowled. "I cannot bear it, Margaret. Mother is relentless. Clarissa is impossible. Every moment here feels like a cage." Margaret closed her book. "Then why do you remain in it?" "Because I am expected to," he snapped. "Because father's ghost and mother's ambition have mapped every step for me since I was a boy." "Yet you are no longer a boy." Her tone softened. "You are the Viscount, Alexander. You may shape your own fate, if only you have the courage." He looked at her, uncertain. "And would you have me scandalize the county? Disgrace the family name?" Margaret smiled, sly and bright. "If the alternative is a life of misery." "Yes, gladly." He sank into a chair, dropping his head into his hands. "What would you have me do, Margaret?" She leaned forward. "Begin by listening to your heart. If Eliza Hathaway is the woman you want, then claim her. The rest can be weathered." Outside, the tension at Montford House simmered. Lady Montford, sensing her son's rebellion, pressed harder, orchestrating dinners and outings to parade Clarissa's virtues. The household bristled with unease. Servants whispered in corridors, and even the butler's step grew hesitant. Clarissa, sensing her prize slipping away, became brittle and sharp, her laughter forced, her gaze lingering on Alexander with possessive intent. Meanwhile, Margaret slipped away on a pretense carriage wheel spinning over rutted lanes until she reached the inn. She found Eliza in the garden, kneeling in the damp earth beside a row of late chrysanthemums. "Miss Hathaway," Margaret greeted, her tone gentle. "Might I speak with you?" Eliza rose, brushing dirt from her hands. "Of course, Lady Margaret." Margaret hesitated, searching Eliza's face for any sign of resentment or fear. Finding none, she said, "My brother is not himself. He has lost his way without you." Eliza's eyes hardened, though her voice was soft. "He must find his way alone, Lady Margaret. I will not return to be hidden or shamed." Margaret nodded. I would not wish it, but know this. I am on your side. You have more friends in Montfort House than you realize. Eliza's composure faltered, gratitude flickering across her face. Thank you, truly. I will do what I can, Margaret promised, her resolve matching Eliza's own. But in the great house on the hill, secrets were not easily kept. Lady Montfort intercepted a note meant for Margaret, her eyes narrowing as she read the hurried script. That evening, she summoned her daughter to the drawing room, her words as cold as the marble beneath her feet. You have betrayed your family, Margaret. You have chosen a serving girl over your own blood. Margaret stood tall, refusing to wilt. I have chosen what is right. Lady Montfort's lips thinned. You are confined to your rooms until you remember your duty. There will be no more messages, no more schemes. Margaret met her mother's gaze, unflinching. You may lock the doors, but you cannot silence me. Elsewhere, Alexander's patience reached its limit. After a particularly tense dinner, Clarissa simpering, his mother glowering, he rose to his feet, voice ringing clear through the candlelit hall. I have made my decision, he announced, every word steady. I will not marry Lady Clarissa. I will not barter my future for a title or a dowry. My life is my own, and I will not be ruled by fear or convenience. The silence that followed was absolute. Clarissa's face blanched, then twisted in anger. Lady Montfort's eyes flashed with something like fury. You would disgrace us all for the sake of a penniless girl? She spat. Alexander stood his ground. I would rather live in disgrace than in a lie. Clarissa rose, gathering her skirts with trembling hands. You will regret this, Alexander. He bowed, unyielding. That is my choice to make. Lady Montfort's composure shattered. You are no son of mine if you do this. He met her glare, sorrow and resolve mingling in his expression. Then let me be no son, but I will not be your puppet. He turned and strode from the hall, every eye in the room upon him. Back at the inn, Eliza felt a shift in the air, a ripple of news, a prickle of anticipation. The villagers, sensing change, drew closer. Old resentment softened, old wounds began to heal. And in her heart, hope dared to flicker once more. As night fell over the village and the great house alike, Alexander stood at the threshold of the world he had always known. His future uncertain, but his heart finally his own. Upstairs, Margaret pressed her face to the window, defiant and unbowed. In the distance, a single candle burned in the window of the Hathaway Inn, a beacon, or a warning, or perhaps both. The hour of reckoning had come, and all fates hung in the balance. Yet, even as the storm gathered over Montfort House, a shadow moved quietly through the corridors, a presence neither Eliza nor Alexander suspected, one that threatened to upend everything they had fought to claim. Rain lashed the windows of the Hathaway Inn, rattling the panes with a fury that seemed to echo through every parlor and drawing room from Alderley to London. It had been only days since Alexander Montfort's defiance had set the county ablaze with rumor, but already the news had spread, swift and merciless as a winter gale. At every tea table, in every carriage, the same story was whispered. The Viscount had refused Lady Clarissa Ashcombe and her fortune, all for the sake of a country girl. Eliza felt the weight of those whispers as she moved about the taproom. The warmth she had earned from the villagers now mingled with a new, uneasy curiosity. Some looked at her with admiration, others with thinly veiled resentment, as if she had seized more than her share of fate's favor. But Eliza's mind was elsewhere, on Alexander, on Margaret, on the uncertain future that waited just beyond the next sunrise. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the world itself was waiting for the next blow to fall. It came sooner than anyone expected. On a grey afternoon, as Eliza was tallying the week's accounts behind the bar, the inn's door burst open. A cold wind swept in, and with it, Lady Clarissa Ashcombe herself, flanked by her mother and two stone-faced constables. The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to shrink from the force of Clarissa's rage. Lady Clarissa's eyes found Eliza at once. There she is, the thief. Eliza straightened, her voice steady though her heart raced. I beg your pardon? Clarissa's mother stepped forward, chin high. The Ashcombe emeralds gone from my daughter's chamber after your last visit to Montfort House. The servants saw you loitering nearby. You have always been grasping, Miss Hathaway. Now you have gone too far. A gasp rippled through the inn. Eliza's uncle appeared, his face mottled with fear and confusion. There must be a mistake. Clarissa's lips curled. Search her things. You will find the necklace, I am sure. The constables advanced. Eliza lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. Search then. I have nothing to hide. They rifled through her meager belongings upstairs, overturning her trunk, shaking out her skirts and petticoats. The villagers crowded the stairwell, drawn by scandal and the scent of disaster. Eliza stood in the doorway, jaw clenched, as the older constable drew out a velvet pouch from beneath her mattress. He opened it, and out tumbled a string of greenstone's emeralds that caught the dim light and cast it in sharp, accusing shards. A collective murmur surged through the crowd. Eliza stared at the necklace, her voice breaking. That is not mine. I have never seen it before. Clarissa's eyes gleamed with triumph. How convenient, Miss Hathaway. Perhaps you will say it leapt there of its own accord. The younger constable looked uncomfortable, but his companion only shrugged. Miss Eliza Hathaway, you are under arrest for the theft of Lady Ashcombe's property. You will come with us. Hands gripped her arms, rough and impersonal. Eliza's uncle sputtered, but the law had no patience for pleas. The villagers parted as she was led out, some staring in shock, others with a glint of satisfaction. Rain struck her face as she was marched into the street, mud clinging to her hem and shame burning in her cheeks. They locked her in the cold stone jail at the edge of the village, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed through her bones. Alone in the darkness, Eliza pressed her forehead to the damp wall, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She thought of her mother's locket, of Margaret's kindness, of Alexander's promise. I will not give up on you. Not now. But promises were fragile things, easily broken by the weight of a world that had never forgiven a woman for daring to reach above her station. Back at Montfort House, Alexander received the news not from a servant, but from Margaret, her face pale with fury. They have arrested her, she said, voice trembling. Clarissa accused her of theft. The constables found the Ashcombe emeralds in Eliza's room. Alexander's blood ran cold. That is impossible. Eliza would never. It was planted, Margaret hissed. Clarissa's hand is all over this. You must act, Alexander. If you do not, no one will. He did not hesitate. Within the hour, he was in the saddle, rain soaking his coat as he rode for the jail. At the door, the constable attempted to bar his way, but Alexander's title had not lost all its power. He demanded to see Eliza, his voice sharp with command. They brought her to him, pale but upright, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Eliza, he breathed, stricken by the sight of her behind iron bars. She managed a wan smile. You should not be here, my lord. This will only make things worse for you. He grasped the bars, his voice fierce. Let them gossip. I will not allow this injustice. I know you are innocent. She blinked rapidly, her composure wavering. Thank you, Alexander. But what can you do? The law can be bent and the truth revealed. I will not rest until you are free. He left her then, jaw set, his entire being sharpened by purpose. He summoned his solicitor, dispatched Margaret to question the servants at Montfort House, and sent word to every magistrate and landowner who owed him a favor. He rode to the Ashcombe estate, demanding an audience with Lord and Lady Ashcombe. They received him with icy civility. My son will not marry a woman whose affections are so easily bought, Lady Ashcombe declared. We will not be shamed. Alexander met her gaze, unflinching. Your daughter has lied. The necklace was planted in Miss Hathaway's room. If you persist in this falsehood, I will see the truth brought to light, regardless of whose reputation suffers. Lord Ashcombe bristled. You threaten us. I promise you, Alexander said coldly, I will not rest until the real thief is unmasked. I will have my steward question every footman and maid in your house. And I will not be silenced, not even by the crown. The threat reverberated through the county. Whispers spread. Alexander had chosen sides, and it was not the one dictated by blood or privilege. Margaret, meanwhile, uncovered a frightened maid willing to speak. She had seen Lady Clarissa slip from the guest corridor late on the night of the ball, a velvet pouch clutched in her hand. She had been paid to keep silent, But Margaret's promise of protection and the threat of exposure loosened her tongue. Armed with the maid's testimony, Alexander confronted the magistrate. The proceedings that followed were swift and brutal, the courtroom packed with gentry and commoners alike, every seat a crucible of rumor and judgment. Eliza was brought forth in shackles, her head held high despite the shame heaped upon her. Lady Clarissa, resplendent in mourning black, took the stand. She coveted what was not hers, she said, voice trembling with righteous indignation. She was always watching, always lurking. I saw her near my chamber, and now my mother's necklace is gone. The magistrate nodded gravely, but before he could pronounce judgment, Alexander rose, his voice cutting through the charged air. Before you condemn an innocent woman, you must hear the truth, he declared. He called Margaret's witness, the trembling maid. Her story spilled out. Clarissa's furtive movements, the bribe, the whispered threats. Clarissa's composure cracked. Lies, she spat. This is an outrage. Alexander stepped forward, eyes blazing. It is you who have shamed yourself, Clarissa, and you would see an innocent woman ruined to soothe your pride. The magistrate, seeing the tide of sentiment shift, ordered the constables to search Clarissa's rooms. Within the hour, they found a matching earring hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a clumsy insurance against the plot's unraveling. A murmur swept the courtroom. Clarissa broke, dissolving into tears and rage, and was led away by her mother. The magistrate cleared his throat. Miss Hathaway, you are free to go. Your good name is restored. Eliza stood, trembling, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. Alexander crossed the space between them, heedless of propriety. He took her hands in his voice rough with emotion. I told you I would not give up on you. She looked up at him, hope and disbelief mingling in her eyes. You have risked everything. He squeezed her hands. You are worth everything. Let the world think what it will. But as the crowd spilled out into the square, voices rose, some in support, others in outrage. The Ashcombs withdrew in scandal, but the damage to the Montfort name was done. Alexander's open defiance had set him against his own class. Lady Montfort shut herself away, refusing to see anyone. Margaret was confined yet again, her loyalty to Eliza now public knowledge. For Eliza, the nightmare was over, but the cost was yet to be counted. The village eyed her with fresh awe, but also fear. She had survived the storm, but the air still crackled with uncertainty. That night, as the rain eased and a fragile peace settled over the inn, Eliza sat by the window, watching the moon rise above the hills. Alexander's promise echoed in her mind, but so did the warning in Lady Montfort's eyes. Outside, hoofbeats approached, slow, deliberate, and laden with meaning. Someone had come to the inn, carrying news that would change everything once more, and in the hush before dawn, fate waited, poised, breathless, for the next turn of the wheel. The moon hung low and heavy over Alderley, its pale light washing the empty lanes in silver. Inside the Hathaway Inn, Eliza sat at her small desk, staring at a half-written letter. Her hands were cold, her thoughts scattered like autumn leaves. Her name had been cleared, but the taste of public disgrace lingered, thick, bitter, impossible to forget. In every corner of the village, she felt the eyes, heard the whispers, the thief, the troublemaker, the girl who had dared reach beyond her place. She pressed the pen to the paper again, her heart thundering. The letter was addressed to her distant aunt in Bristol, an offer of work folded between its lines, escape, a chance to vanish from the scandal, to begin anew where no one knew her story, her shame, or the wild hope that had almost undone her. Eliza blinked hard against tears. She had fought so long, so stubbornly, only to find herself back at the edge of nowhere. A floorboard creaked. Eliza turned, startled, to find Margaret Montfort in the doorway. Her cheeks flushed from the night air, her eyes sharp with concern. You are leaving, Margaret said, not as a question but a fact. Eliza looked away. I must. I cannot stay where I am not wanted. Margaret crossed the room and sat beside her. You are wanted, Eliza, you are needed, by more people than you know. Needed as a cautionary tale, perhaps, Eliza replied, voice brittle. Or as an object of pity, I'm neither. Margaret smiled gently. You are the bravest woman I have ever known. You faced lies and cruelty, and you never broke. You have given hope to people who never believed they could ask for more. Eliza shook her head. Hope is a dangerous thing, Margaret. It leads only to disappointment. Or to happiness, Margaret whispered, if you will let it. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps came from below. Moments later, Alexander Montfort burst into the room, breathless, rainwater beading on his shoulders. Eliza, please, wait. His eyes were wild, his voice ragged with fear and longing. She stiffened, bracing herself against the tidal wave of feeling his presence brought. You should not be here, Alexander. Your mother, your world will never accept me. He dropped to his knees before her, heedless of Margaret's startled gasp. Let them talk. Let them sneer. I do not care, Eliza. I love you. I have loved you from the moment you refused to bow, from the moment you met my gaze, and saw the man beneath the title. Eliza's breath shuddered out of her. You do not know what you are asking. This is not a fairy tale. I'm not a lady, and I never will be. Your family, your friend's society will never see me as your equal. Alexander reached for her hands, his voice breaking. I know the road will be hard, but I would rather walk it with you than spend my life in comfort and emptiness. I want you, Eliza, not as a secret, not as a convenience, but as my partner in all things. She stared at him, torn between longing and dread. You ask me to give up everything I know, to live in a world that will never be mine. He shook his head fiercely. No, Eliza. I ask you to help me build a new world, one where we decide what is possible. A long silence stretched between them, the air thick with the gravity of all that might be lost or gained. Margaret, watching, placed a gentle hand on Eliza's shoulder. Do not let fear keep you from joy, she murmured. You have already survived the worst they could do to you. You deserve happiness as much as any lady born to silk and silver. You have earned it. Eliza's fingers tightened around Alexander's. I am afraid, she whispered. I am too, Alexander replied. But I am more afraid of losing you than of anything they can say or do. Downstairs, the inn's door slammed open, and angry voices echoed up the stairwell. Lady Montfort, imperious and unyielding, stormed into the parlor, trailed by a pair of stone-faced footmen. She swept up the stairs, her gaze settling on her son and the woman who had become her nemesis. Alexander, what is the meaning of this? Have you no shame? Lady Montfort's voice was thunder. Alexander rose, drawing Eliza to her feet beside him. I have lived in shame long enough, mother. Shame for not speaking my mind, for letting you decide my happiness. That ends tonight. Lady Montfort's eyes flashed. You would throw away your family, your birthright, for this. I would throw away anything that kept me from the woman I love. Alexander said, his voice ringing with conviction. If you cannot accept Eliza, then you do not accept me. I will not renounce her. I will not renounce myself. The silence that followed was electric. Margaret stepped forward, chin lifted. Eliza is worth 10 of any lady at court. She is the heart this family has always lacked. Lady Montfort's lips thinned to a white line. You shame us all. Alexander held Eliza's hand, steady and sure. No, mother, I free us. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lady Montfort turned, her skirts swirling, and swept from the room without another word. Eliza swayed, the weight of the confrontation settling over her. Alexander pulled her close, his voice low and urgent. I do not know what comes next, but I will fight for you, Eliza, for us. Will you let me? Tears shimmered in her eyes, and for the first time in weeks she let herself hope. Yes, she whispered. I will try. Below, the storm had passed, but the world outside was still and uncertain. Yet, for the first time, Eliza felt the stirrings of a future shaped by her own choices, fragile, daring, and utterly her own. And as dawn crept over the horizon, bringing with it the promise of reckoning and renewal, a stranger watched from beneath the elm's eyes fixed on the inn, intent on secrets yet to be revealed. The Hathaway Inn was quiet in the early hours, the hush broken only by the faint sound of the fire and the soft clink of crockery as Eliza finished her morning tasks. She had slept little. her thoughts churning with Alexander's declaration and the storm it had unleashed. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of fear and hope, but she faced the day with her back straight and her eyes clear. She was wiping the counter when the door opened, and a familiar, icy presence filled the room. Lady Montfort entered, wrapped in a velvet cloak despite the spring warmth, her expression cold enough to freeze the hearth. "Miss Hathaway," she said, her voice clipped, "a word in private." Eliza met her gaze steadily. "Of course, my lady." They moved into the small parlor. Lady Montfort did not sit. She surveyed the room with disdain, then turned her full attention to Eliza. "My son is stubborn to the point of self-destruction," she began. "He believes himself in love, and he is prepared to disgrace our family for a passing infatuation. But you are not blind to the reality of your position." Eliza's jaw tightened. "I know exactly where I stand, Lady Montfort." "Then you will understand the wisdom of accepting my offer." Lady Montfort drew a purse from her reticule and set it on the table, the gold coins within glinting even through the silk. "Take this. It is more than enough to establish yourself elsewhere, a comfortable life far from Alderley. In return, you will end this nonsense with Alexander. Quietly, with dignity. It is the best for all concerned." The air between them was taut as wire. Eliza looked at the purse, then at Lady Montfort's unyielding face. "Your generosity is impressive, my lady," she replied quietly. "But I am not for sale. I do not want your money or your pity. If Alexander and I part, it will be by my choice alone, not because I was bought off." Lady Montfort's nostrils flared. "You mistake pride for sense. You cannot imagine what it would mean to live under the constant scrutiny of our world. You would be forever an outsider, forever judged." "I have lived my whole life under judgment," Eliza said. "I have survived worse than gossip. What I will not do is betray myself." A tense silence. Then Lady Montfort gathered the purse with trembling hands. "You are a fool," she hissed. "You will regret this." Eliza watched her leave, shoulders shaking, not with fear, but with the release of a burden long carried. She stood for a moment, letting the clarity of her refusal settle in her bones, before returning to the taproom. The next days brought a change to Alderley. Word spread quickly of Lady Clarissa's disgrace and the truth behind the false accusations. The villagers, slow to trust but swift to judge, now turned their sympathy and respect to Eliza. Mrs. Bray sent a fresh loaf and a note of apology. The blacksmith's wife pressed Eliza's hand in the street and whispered, "We were wrong." Even the vicar paused in his rounds to offer quiet encouragement. For the first time in months, Eliza felt the weight of isolation lift. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was cautious admiration. She moved through the market with her head high, and children greeted her by name. Meanwhile, Montfort House was a fortress besieged by rumor and uncertainty. Lady Clarissa, her pride shattered, departed the county in the dead of night, her carriage wheels raising only a brief murmur of interest. Lady Montfort remained sequestered, her anger festering in silence. Margaret, no longer confined, found every opportunity to visit the inn, bringing tales of her brother's unwavering resolve. Alexander himself was a man transformed. No longer the distant, dutiful heir, he moved through the village with purpose, seeking Eliza's counsel, sharing laughter and quiet moments when the world allowed. He bore the coldness of his peers and the sharp glances of his mother with a new serenity, as if freed from a lifetime's weight. One golden afternoon, as the shadows lengthened across the inn's garden, Alexander found Eliza kneeling among the early roses. He watched her for a long moment, his heart full to bursting with all the words he had not yet spoken. She looked up at last, her hair catching the sunlight, her expression wary but not unkind. "Will you walk with me?" Alexander asked. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron, and together they strolled along the green lane behind the inn. Birds flitted overhead, and the air was sweet with the promise of summer. They walked in silence at first, neither wishing to break the fragile peace. At last, Alexander stopped beneath an old yew tree. He turned to her, his gaze earnest and full of longing. "Eliza," he began, his voice trembling, "I have loved you from the moment I understood what it meant to love at all. I have fought my family, my friends, even myself, but I will never fight my heart again. Will you marry me? The words hung in the air, bright and terrifying. Eliza's breath caught. She looked down at her hands, then up at him, her eyes shining with uncertainty. I care for you, Alexander, more than I ever thought possible. But I am afraid, not just of your world, but of losing myself in it. I have worked so hard to be seen as my own person, to be respected, not pitied. He reached for her hand, gentle and patient. I do not want you to change, Eliza. I want you as you are proud, stubborn, brave. I will wait for you as long as you need. She smiled, a tremulous thing, and squeezed his fingers. Then wait a little longer. I must be certain. Not just for you, but for myself. He bowed his head, relief mingling with disappointment. I will wait, and I will prove to you, every day, that we can build something true together. They walked back in the soft light, the world around them hushed with anticipation. That night, as Eliza watched the moonrise from her window, she felt the stirrings of hope grow stronger. The village was changing. She was changing. For the first time, the future seemed not a sentence, but a question one she had the right to answer for herself. Yet in the shadows of Montfort House, Lady Montfort paced, her mind whirring with schemes not yet spent, her pride still raw. Outside the inn, a carriage lingered, its occupant watching the windows with patient intent. Eliza's choice was not yet made, and with every passing day, the cost and the reward of that choice only grew. The grand ballroom of Montfort House shimmered with candlelight, every polished surface and gilded cornice reflecting the first blush of spring. Laughter and music drifted through the air, weaving a tapestry of celebration for the annual spring assembly, a tradition older than memory, but never quite like this. For tonight, Eliza Hathaway stood at the heart of it all, a guest of honor by invitation and by the slow, hard-won respect of an entire county. She paused at the top of the marble staircase, her breath catching at the sight below. Alderley's finest had gathered in silks and satins, yet all eyes seemed to turn to her. She wore a gown the color of wild violets, simple but elegant, her hair swept up with just a sprig of rosemary, a nod to both her roots and her quiet defiance. Margaret Montfort waited at her side, radiant with pride. "You have nothing to fear," Margaret whispered. "You have already won them over, though they would never admit it." Eliza managed a tremulous smile. "I'm not sure I have won anyone, least of all myself." Margaret squeezed her arm. "Come, tonight is for you." As they descended, the room hushed. Whispers swirled, admiration mingling with curiosity, old prejudices retreating before the undeniable dignity in Eliza's bearing. At the foot of the stairs, Alexander stood waiting. He was resplendent in evening attire, his gaze never wavering from her face as she crossed the threshold of her old world and stepped fearful, determined into the new. He bowed, offering his arm. "Miss Hathaway, may I have the first dance?" Her hand trembled slightly as she took his. "You may, my lord." He led her onto the floor, the orchestra striking up a waltz. Every conversation faltered, every eye drawn to them as they moved in perfect time, Alexander's touch gentle but certain at her waist. The crowd watched, breathless, as the Viscount of Alderley made his devotion unmistakably public. No longer the stuff of rumor or scandal, but a declaration, bold and clear, beneath the blazing chandeliers. "You are not afraid?" Eliza whispered, her cheeks flushed with more than exertion. "I'm only afraid of letting you go," Alexander replied, his voice low and fierce. "Tonight, I want the world to see that I am proud to love you." Around them, the mood shifted. Margaret beamed from the edge of the dance floor, and even the village matrons, once so sharp-tongued, softened as they watched. The vicar's wife dabbed at her eyes. Mrs. Bray clapped quietly, her face alight with satisfaction. Eliza felt the warmth of the room gather her in, the old walls of prejudice crumbling with every graceful turn. The music swelled and faded. Alexander drew Eliza aside, beneath the arch of spring flowers. "I have asked you before, and I will ask you once more, here and now, before all who matter to me. Will you marry me, Eliza Hathaway?" She looked up at him, searching his eyes for any trace of doubt. Instead, she found only hope and a kind of reverence that steadied her soul. Before she could answer, a hush fell. Lady Montfort stood nearby, her bearing regal but her eyes uncharacteristically soft. She stepped forward, every movement measured, and addressed Eliza so all might hear. "Miss Hathaway," she said, voice ringing clear, "I have fought you, doubted you, and tried to turn my son's heart from you. But tonight I see what I have long refused to see, your courage, your integrity, and the happiness you have brought him. I was wrong to judge you by your birth and your poverty. You have shown us all what true worth is." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Eliza bowed her head, emotion thick in her throat. "Thank you, Lady Montfort. I seek no favor but honesty and respect." Lady Montfort inclined her head. "You have them, and my blessing. Should you accept Alexander's hand?" The crowd stirred, a wave of approval and relief rippling through the assembly. Alexander turned to Eliza, hope and vulnerability naked on his face. "Say yes," he whispered, "but only if you will stand beside me as my equal in all things." Eliza drew a steady breath. She looked around the room, the faces that once shunned her, now watching with open expectation, the man beside her, who had risked everything for her dignity, and Margaret, whose faith had never wavered. She met Alexander's gaze, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I will marry you, Alexander, but only if you promise before all these witnesses that our union will be one of equals. I will not be a shadow at your side, nor an ornament for your arm. I must be your partner, in word and in deed." Alexander's eyes shone with tears he did not attempt to hide. "I swear it, Eliza, on my life, my name, and my love for you." A cheer rose, sweeping through the room. Margaret rushed forward, embracing them both. Lady Montfort offered a small, genuine smile. The orchestra struck up a triumphant reel, and the crowd surged onto the dance floor, their approval sealing the moment with laughter and joy. Eliza stood in Alexander's arms, the weight of the past falling away with every beat of her heart. The old boundaries were gone. What remained was a future she could claim for herself, fierce and bright. Yet, as the night spun on, a shadow lingered at the edge of the revelry. Not all were content to see old wounds healed, and in the flicker of candlelight, a new threat was quietly taking shape, ready to test the strength of their hard-won happiness. The morning of the wedding dawned soft and clear, a golden haze lying over Alderley, as if the world itself wished to bless the day. The church bells called out across the valley, their song light and sure, and the village stirred with anticipation. At the Hathaway Inn, laughter and nervous excitement filled every room. Eliza, standing before a simple mirror, smoothed the folds of her gown white lawn with a sprig of lavender at the waist, a tribute to both humility and hope. Margaret Montfort, radiant in pale blue, adjusted Eliza's hair with deft fingers. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Today, you show us all that love and courage can remake the world." Eliza smiled, her nerves momentarily soothed. "You helped me find that courage, Margaret. I hope you know it." Margaret pressed her hand. "And now, it is yours, alone." Downstairs, the taproom was transformed. Tables laden with flowers, windows thrown wide to the spring, and the faces of friends and neighbors bright with celebration. Even Eliza's uncle, who had once doubted her every decision, stood at the threshold, pride softening the lines of his face. The church was filled near to bursting. The vicar, beaming, welcomed each guest by name. Lady Montfort arrived, arm in arm with Margaret, her expression regal but no longer cold. The village children, scrubbed and starched, tossed petals along the aisle as Eliza entered, her heart pounding with wonder. Alexander waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked less the Viscount and more a man transformed, hopeful, humbled, fiercely certain. As Eliza reached his side, he took her hand, their fingers entwining with the ease of long practice. The ceremony was brief, but every word rang with meaning. When Alexander vowed to honor and cherish Eliza as his equal, as his partner, there was not a dry eye in the church. Eliza's own voice was clear and steady, as she promised the same, her gaze never wavering from his. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the bells pealed again, and the congregation erupted in applause. Outside, the village square had become a festival, tables groaning with food, musicians playing reels and jigs, neighbors old and new gathering to share in the joy. Eliza and Alexander led the first dance, their laughter echoing beneath the blooming chestnut trees. Children darted between the tables, and even Lady Montfort allowed herself a small, genuine smile as she watched her son's happiness. Margaret, free now to chart her own course, stood arm in arm with a young scholar from Oxford, her eyes alight with possibility. The Hathaway Inn flourished in the weeks that followed, transformed by Eliza's vision. She welcomed everyone, tenant and tradesman, widow and orphan, with the same warmth. Her door always open. She hired more staff, paid fair wages, and made sure that no one in Alderley went hungry or cold if she could help it. The tap room became a gathering place for laughter, music, and the sharing of burdens. Alexander, often by her side, supported her efforts with a humility and pride that did not go unnoticed. The Montfort family, too, began to change. Old traditions softened under the weight of new happiness. Lady Montfort, though still formidable, found herself drawn into village life, attending charity teas, assisting at the school, and even inviting Eliza's uncle to supper. Margaret's independence flourished. She spent her days writing essays on social reform, and her evenings reading them aloud to anyone who would listen. The estate's tenants discovered a new respect for the Montforts, as Alexander and Eliza worked together to improve living conditions and settle disputes with fairness. One evening, as dusk fell over the valley, Eliza stood on the inn's porch, watching the last of the children chase fireflies. Alexander slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, "choosing this life, with all its battles?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Never. We built it together, Alexander. And every day we proved that the world can be changed, if only a little at a time." He kissed her forehead, his voice full of wonder. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed." "And you have given me the chance to be more than I ever dreamed," she replied, her voice trembling with joy. They stood in silence, the warmth of home and hope enfolding them. The inn glowed behind them, filled with music and the laughter of friends, a beacon of all they had built from courage and kindness. In the months that followed, their love endured every challenge. They faced gossip and the occasional sneer, but those voices grew fainter with each season. The village, once divided, now looked to them as proof that dignity and compassion could bridge any gulf. Margaret's essays found their way to London, sparking debate and admiration. Lady Montfort, though never truly yielding her pride, began to champion causes of her own, her name lending weight to petitions for the poor and the voiceless. And the Hathaway Inn, once a place of shadows, became a symbol of hope for all who entered. Eliza and Alexander's marriage, rooted in respect and equality, flourished. They faced the world side by side, partners in work, in laughter, in sorrow, and in joy. And in each other, they found the home neither had dared to dream. As spring gave way to summer, the air in Alderley was alive with new beginnings. The past no longer weighed upon Eliza's heart. She had claimed her place, not as a lady by birth, but as a woman of strength, beloved and unafraid, her dignity unassailable. And so, with every dawn, Eliza and Alexander stepped into the future they had forged together, certain that love, when met with courage and honor, could overcome even the oldest barriers. Theirs was a story whispered in the lanes and sung in the taproom, a reminder to all who heard it that hope, once kindled, could light even the darkest path.